Okay, well, welcome everyone, and I guess we'll get started. Thank you for coming to the second in a series of 3 lunch hour sessions that allow this year's Loeb Fellows to introduce themselves to the GSD community. The third and final session will take place in this room on Thursday from 12:30 to 2 p.m. I also want to invite you all to come to our Meet the Loeb Fellows reception in Piper Auditorium tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. I think yesterday I maybe moved that up to 6:30 by mistake, but I see on our poster it is 7 p.m., so maybe I was just a little over-eager. It's tomorrow night in Piper, 7 p.m. Please bring your friends. Refreshments and music will be provided. We organize this event in a kind of speed dating format, so that means we will place all the Loeb Fellows, not in a big clump, a big kind of clubby group together, but we'll actually isolate them each at a table, making them vulnerable to all of you to come asking questions. Please feel free to bring them a refreshment too when you come over if you notice that they're running out, and talk to them about their talks, talk to them about ideas you had, maybe some overlapping interests, and it's really a great opportunity to get to know them individually. So for new audience members, and I think I see a lot of people who were here yesterday, and a lot of friends, a lot of some Loeb alums, and so on. So I don't feel this is so necessary, but I will reintroduce myself. My name is Mark Mulligan. I am an associate professor in practice here at the GSD. And I'm currently the interim curator of the Loeb Fellowship for this year, 2014-15. Let me also introduce there in the front row, Sally Young, the Loeb Fellowship coordinator and my partner and mentor in planning and overseeing this unique program this year. Also, let me introduce, great honor, Bill Doble, the fellowship's first curator, is also here with us this morning. Now, before I introduce today's 3 speakers, let me say a few words about the fellowship and why we're here. In my introductory remarks yesterday, I reminded the audience about its 44-year history and its mission to bring accomplished mid-career professionals to the GSD for a year of interaction, debate, reflection, and yes, preparation to go back out into the world to assume positions of leadership in the future. I won't go into detail about those things again today, because I just did. But I will return to one aspect of John Loeb's mission in creating and endowing the fellowship, and that's his deep concern for the future of cities. At the time of John Loeb's gift, American cities were perceived to be in serious decline. They were polluted, crime-ridden, poorly served by public infrastructure, and unattractive to new investment. This decline continued well into the 70s, and in many cases, forms of decline continue today. And the first generation of Loeb Fellows were very much selected to be leaders in finding innovative solutions to the problems of the American city. And indeed, those fellows ended up, many of them playing lead and supporting roles in turning around cities and metropolitan regions in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to become more prosperous, inclusive, healthy, and yes, beautiful places. Over time, the Loeb Fellowship expanded its scope to include those working in international contexts as well. But it seems that cities will never run out of problems to solve, and that's probably good in that it means we foresee the need to continue inviting Loeb Fellows to come to the GSD and to keep the fellowship active for a long time. With each successive generation, it's interesting to note how the ways we frame and discuss the problems of cities continues to evolve. Our optimism about cities today should be tempered by evidence that not all people have been equally served by renewed investment. Furthermore, as a society, we're beginning to look more closely at the impacts urban development has on the non-urban. And more than ever, we are aware of the fragility of our planet and its natural and man-made environments, and recognizing the need to create resiliency, not only in cities, but in all areas of the globe impacted by human activity. Resiliency, in fact, is the key theme of today's talks, and I'll return to this in a moment. First, a general word of encouragement to the audience. The current class of Loeb Fellows, like those who've gone before, were selected in a highly competitive process. We seek out those who are and will become leaders in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors at every level of important decision-making throughout the world. And for this year, they're ours. They're part of our community. They're here to share their experience and wisdom, but also to get involved with you and your projects, to learn from the GSD community. The Loeb Fellows are a tremendous resource for all of us, and I will challenge each and every one of you in the audience today to make the most of your opportunity to interact them while they're in Cambridge. Now on to our speakers. I will present them as a group so that they can present one after the other without further interruption. This will also leave more time at the end for questions and answers. We've grouped the talks of this year's Fellows into 3 themes related to commonalities we perceive. Today's speakers are grouped under the theme Resiliency for the 21st Century. We talk a lot today about climate change, sea level rise, the destruction of ecosystems, the unsustainability of resource depletion, and so on. Perhaps for the first time in centuries, we're questioning our human race's ability to reverse trends of overconsumption and exploitation and to restore the balance of the planet. Strategies for bouncing back, which is ultimately the meaning of resiliency, so bouncing back to something, bouncing back to a balanced condition, require decisive and coordinated action at multiple scales, from the global and regional to the urban and architectural. And our 3 presenters today each has his or her own way of addressing resiliency at diverse scales in their work, be it in an urbanized, agricultural, or natural, environmental, or some mix of these contexts. The first speaker will be Scott Campbell. Prior to his fellowship year, Scott was director of the Palmer Land Trust, a nonprofit organization working at the intersection of conservation, preservation, economics, and community development in southern Colorado. In this region, large cities and agricultural towns face radically juxtaposed trends of growth and decline due to consumptive land patterns and competition for limited water resources. Scott leads conservation efforts that build prosperity across diverse communities, underscoring local control of land and water resources, and empowering individual and community self-determination. He has founded or co-founded a number of initiatives and collaborations aimed at protecting public and private lands around some of the nation's premier scenic mountain landscapes and byways. His work has resulted in the permanent protection of 25,000 acres of natural and agricultural lands and has launched 40,000 acres of conservation projects currently in progress. Before joining the Palmer Land Trust, Scott worked for the Colorado Office of Economic Development and International Trade. His current efforts are focused on advancing new models for Western water conservation, in which conservation easements, rotational fallowing, and unique agricultural municipal transfer agreements can provide long-term water supplies to farms and cities as an alternative to the buy and dry trend that devastates local economies. As a Loeb Fellow, Scott will hone his understanding of the political, social, and market forces that shape conservation outcomes while studying conservation models that support more equitable natural resource allocation. Scott will be followed by Thaddeus Pawlowski. As an urban designer for New York City in the mid-2000s, Thaddeus became concerned about building regulations and practices that actually inhibited building for greater resilience. Long before Hurricane Sandy struck in 2012, he had begun to anticipate and plan for the increased threat of coastal storms and rising sea levels. His knowledge of emergency operations, zoning, and urban design uniquely situated him to be an architect of the city's recovery as planning advisor in the New York City's Mayor's Office for Housing Recovery Operations. In 2008, Thaddeus initiated the What If New York design competition that is credited with shifting the city's storm response focus from evacuation and shelter to adaptation to predictable threats. He collaborated on a playbook for displaying post-disaster temporary housing in a way that facilitated consensus-based comprehensive planning. Months before Hurricane Sandy, he convened 80 respected architects to develop urban design principles for the flood zone and specific zoning changes for greater resilience. These are recommendations that were adopted after the storm. Together with Architecture Humanity and enterprise community partners, he organized the Sandy Design Help Desk, which offers property owners in flood zones personalized guidance in understanding their rebuilding for resilience options. During his fellowship year, Thaddeus will document the lessons he learned from Hurricane Sandy, research planning and design models from other cities, and craft recommendations for improvement, with particular attention to more effective information management strategies. Our third speaker today will be Maria Jaakkola, a Finnish landscape architect and artist with a distinguished career in both fields. She is currently on leave from her position as head of the environmental office within Helsinki's city planning department. Leading a team of a dozen experts, she has developed the discipline of landscape planning as an integral part of city planning, from overall land use strategies to detailed design proposals. Maria recently completed the first part of the Helsinki Green Areas strategy in conjunction with the visionary phase of the new Helsinki Master Plan. The project, which has raised international interest, will define the future of the city's green areas network from three perspectives: recreation and well-being, city identity, and ecological sustainability. The vision plan sets goals of accessibility and integrity for the city's green fingers system and aims at preserving and developing the essential characteristics of both green and blue infrastructure in Helsinki, blue being maritime. Maria lectures regularly in academic and professional seminars, and her recent article on Helsinki was published in Green Cities of Europe. She's also written about landscape and phenomenology, and as a watercolor painter, she has exhibited her work in Europe and in the US. During her fellowship year, Maria will critically analyze factors that make cities attractive with particular attention to their systems of open space. Her research interests, together with her practitioner's experience and artist's eye, constitute a platform from which to explore the essence and experience of landscape, urban landscape, excuse me. And with that, I will introduce Scott Campbell.
Great, thank you, Mark. And so everybody had long enough to take a look at this picture that's up here. This is the west side of Pikes Peak, the area that I live, work, and play in. This is what it looks like this time of year, with the aspens just turning and snow starting to fall on the high peaks. And with all due respect to our Loeb mantra of leaving here and going out and changing the world, I will say that there are some parts of the world that don't need changing, and I think this is one of them. They are changing very fast, however. If you hop over America's mountain, this is what exists on the other side. This is fairly emblematic of the way that the state of Colorado is growing, and our state is growing pretty fast. We have a population growth rate that is about nearly twice the national average. We lose about 100,000 acres of open lands every year in our state, and our large farms and ranches shrink on average 80 acres every year. That's a reduction that is 4 times greater than what we see in the state with the next greatest loss. So we have tremendous land conversion pressures in Colorado. We also know that in this state, these open lands are key drivers for 2 of our largest industry sectors: agriculture, for obvious reasons, they depend on open lands, but also for tourism. It's a state where tourists, more than anything else, in studies that have been going on for decades, value unspoiled natural lands. Many people think about Colorado when they think about coming to visit as a state that is a mountainous state, and 2/3 of it is in the mountains, but there is 1/3 of the state on the high plains. My sort of movement across the state began where the mountains meet the plains, where I went to school at Colorado College. Did my graduate work there in education. Went and participated in the research and education work at an archaeological research center that was at one time part of Northwestern University's Southwest Field School. Got very involved with the land conservation and historic preservation communities in that area. This is a design actually by a Harvard GSD grad, Dennis Holloway, showing one of the 550-room community sites that we studied. That site's about 850 years old. I left Crow Canyon to go to work in the Governor's Office of Economic Development and International Trade. The state of Colorado has made a lot of investments in land conservation, historic preservation, and it wanted to capitalize on those investments and help communities throughout the state capitalize on those investments by launching a heritage tourism program. And so that's what I led during my time at the Office of Economic Development. My real love, however, was in landscape conservation and getting more entrenched with those communities. I was very enticed by the opportunity to go and take the executive director position at Palmer Land Trust, which is where I've been working for the last 7 years. During my time there, we not only focused on work here in the Pikes Peak region, where one of our offices is located, but we expanded and moved down to the farm country in Rocky Ford as well. This is our service territory, covers about 1/5 of the state. It is also, it spans the Arkansas River watershed. The Arkansas River is the longest river in eastern Colorado, flowing from the center of the state off the Continental Divide out east. It really defines two very distinct communities, or bisects, I should say, two very distinct communities where I work. One, the Pikes Peak region, where we have a higher growth rate than nearly any other place in Colorado, and the land conversion pressures are quite intense. And then down in the southeastern portion of the state, where we have actually one of the largest intact expanses of native prairie left in the country, but where we have seen a lot of marginalization of communities because of resource procurement interests won by the Army. If you've heard about the Pinyon Canyon expansion, an effort by the Department of Defense to acquire over 600,000 acres down here as a training ground. And then the issue that I've been dealing with a little bit more, which is the movement of water out of these communities to the south to supply the needs of growing cities to the north. This is the Arkansas River here. It is an over-appropriated system. There is no water available for new uses, and what that means is that any user wanting to acquire additional supplies, like a growing city needs to acquire those supplies from another existing user. And the way that cities have done that over the past few decades has been to purchase farms down here, appropriate the waters from those farms. Those farms are left fallow. The water is diverted further upstream, and it supplies water for our growing populations. A little bit about Palmer Land Trust before I dive into some examples of our work in both of those areas. As Mark said, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to guarantee open lands remain a part of southeastern Colorado's heritage. We were incorporated in 1977. Today, we're one of the 25 largest land trusts in the country. Based on our conservation holdings, there are about 1,700 land trusts total in the United States. They've protected more land than is contained in our national park units, and every year are protecting over 2 million acres. We are closing in on having protected over 100,000 acres of open lands in our last 38 years. Our methods, we essentially, we don't operate as advocates who work to oppose land use issues that we're not happy with. Rather, we plan very proactively to conserve lands, and we conserve them by obtaining some type of deeded interest in that land. When we were young, we raised money to purchase land. We own that land. We manage that land. These days, we acquire other types of deeded interests as well, working with certain types of deed restrictions or conservation easements. We raise a mix of public and private capital for fee simple and conservation easement acquisitions. And then we also work with landowners and communities, landowners in particular who donate land or voluntarily restrict uses on that land for conservation purposes that they believe benefit them, the environment, their families, the community. This, I think, is really important in terms of our methods. A lot of times we see conservation groups approaching conservation from some sort of a postage stamp, what I would call a postage stamp standpoint. They see a property that they've loved for a long time. Maybe it's the local farm, maybe it's an open space area, but maybe it's threatened. Maybe there's an oil and gas development that is putting pressure on that land, and it may be at risk of conversion. And we see maybe there's some success saving that property, and then maybe there's another one over here that we really cared about, and we look to protect this property over here. That does not create the kind of landscape conservation at scale that is going to create any kind of ecological functioning. And what we also know today is that does not create any kind of functioning within the cities and towns that occupy that landscape. In my mind, that's akin to building a mile of bicycle trail inside a city that has absolutely no way to get to or from that mile of bicycle trail. You need this large type of landscape effort to really benefit the ecological systems and the human systems that are part of this landscape. So essentially, we operate as planners, and we employ land conservation as a critical community development tool. That means we're focusing on public health. That means we're focusing on regional food systems, on our quality of life, economies from local to global, transportation systems, ecosystem function, as I mentioned, and ecosystem services, so things like stormwater runoff mitigation, carbon sequestration, and other types of risk management. I'm going to start by giving some examples of our work in the Pikes Peak region. Our work there is guided by our Protect the Peak campaign, which is sort of that large, again, landscape scale umbrella that we're working under. And then I'm going to try and demonstrate how we're working at a variety of scales within that context through a real community-oriented approach. So you can see here on the map, Colorado Springs, where the mountains meets the plains, is on the right. Major interstate corridor going through it, major state highway corridor going east to west. Pikes Peak is here towards the center of the map. Starting on the Front Range, here's lands that have been protected by land trust or local government efforts, oftentimes with the two partners working together. Our deeded interests are the lighter red color here. And I'd like to highlight some of our work that's taken place here. Oops, sorry, this is coming in a little dark. This is a park acquisition that was acquired through multiple parcel acquisitions. It's right in the city limits. It's 1,500 acres. Big part of our work is acquiring new parks, trails, linkages for growing cities. It is minutes from downtown Colorado Springs. It protects our city's scenic mountain backdrop, as you can see here. It sees over about 300,000 unique visitors annually. This is up the hill a little ways. This is a much smaller open space. This is a 300-acre private piece of property protected by a conservation easement. We initially protected this because this is the viewscape from the Garden of the Gods, where over 2 million domestic and international visitors come every year up towards Pikes Peak. It's one of our most famous and photographed views. But the property also serves other purposes. It provides a buffer between Pike National Forest and the 187 homes that are in the community that owns it. And the preservation efforts that we conducted here created opportunities to address a big problem that we have in Colorado, thank you, which is suppression of fire that has created these catastrophic fire regimes. Normally when we have fire come through, we don't see this catastrophic buildup of fuels, but that's what had happened here. So what we tried to create up here, I should say what the community tried to recreate with prescriptions that we had assisted with, was a more natural vegetation regime. And in 2012, when Colorado's most destructive wildfire, until 2013, when Colorado Springs had a second hit, we saw the impacts of what a small 300-acre investment could have on our community. We had 347 homes destroyed, 2 lives were lost, over $350 million in insurance claims, but that was in the communities that you're seeing down here. The fire had come up to this area where we see this landscape protected, and it essentially laid down and died. And part of that was for the prescription, and you're seeing some of that taking place right here. This is a more naturally looking forest, what you would see if there had been more regular fire regimes, and this is the area that was treated. This is the area where the burn had come in, and it was able to be contained once it hit this area. These fire mitigation efforts in the Solitude Park open space that the Cedar Heights community led were credited with saving 187 homes, possibly preventing the fire spread into the city of Manitou Springs, and saved property probably on the order of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. The burn scar was 18,000 acres. You can see where the Solitude Park open space prevented the fires moving here, and that was not the case in the city here. It was a good opportunity to get a few investments from insurance company foundations to continue our planning work along the Front Range. We are now employing efforts to conserve more than just these blue protected lands that fall in Colorado's wildland urban interface, but there's a lot of other parcels that we're trying to both protect as open space and replicate these mitigation efforts. Moving up north, example of another project along a highway corridor that's viewed by 20,000 vehicles each day, also protecting the headwaters of our watershed. Lots of cost savings there. Move on around the peak. This is a 12,000 acre privately led conservation effort. Nature Conservancy led this one back in 1979. We've continued to build on this to the west and south of Pikes Peak, down one of our states, I think I'm losing my laser here, but one of our states' 25 National Scenic Byways. This, all told, is now a 26-mile expanse of protected lands around the north and west slopes of Pikes Peak. This shows one of the historic agricultural areas that the National Scenic Byway goes through. The entire valley floor is protected by Palmer Land Trust. Planning is a big part of our work. Before this plan was developed and implemented, about 900 acres in this area were preserved. After the plan was developed and priorities were highlighted, within 5 years, 9,000 acres had been preserved, and another 5,000 acres of conservation projects were launched. This highlights the scale, the byway going up here, and properties everywhere in the photo protected. We expanded, as Mark had said, to launch a statewide coalition, received the first multi-million-dollar Federal Highway Administration grant for Colorado byways conservation, and some amazing success to date where we've seen 90 properties, over 30,000 acres, and $115 million in contributions going forward to support communities along byways. So here's a look at the total land that has been protected around Pikes Peak, and you can start to see that larger umbrella context of building that landscape scale effort benefits the ecology and the communities. Am I good? 15? Okay, I am out of time, so I'm going to limit my talk on the lower Arkansas Valley, but needless to say, planning directs our efforts down there as well. This is a lot, the work that we're doing here around water is a lot of what my Loeb Fellowship is going to be about. And I will, unfortunately, skip to the end here, talk about what I'm going to be doing this year, and hopefully on Wednesday night have a chance to talk with you more about this, those that are interested. But what I'm hoping to do this year is model the historic loss of water in the lower Arkansas Valley and the corresponding economic decline that's come with it. As Mark said, hone my understanding of the forces that are at work that shape these outcomes. And we've been implementing some pretty innovative water conservation models, but I would like to see what else is available in the world, and I think Harvard is a great place to come and look at global models, so that's one of the things I'm very excited about. And then finally, we've mentioned big communities, but I also want to mention people. And what we've seen happening here in the southeastern part of the state is that these communities have one of the greatest assets in the state of Colorado. Water is only going to get more precious and more expensive, and yet they are one of the most marginalized communities. And there has to be ways that we can help them capitalize on this tremendous asset whose value continues to increase. So I'm looking forward to the year. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Thaddeus Pawlowski. I'm really glad to be here, Loeb Fellow this year, and that was great. Thanks Scott for showing us your work there. That scale is just amazing. I'm going to be showing work at a much different scale. I'm an urban designer in New York City. Been working in New York City government for the last 10 years. I've done a slightly different talk than normal today because I just want to, this is like a new page and I'm really excited about learning from everyone. So I wanted to lay out more of my questions and kind of where my thinking is going right now. So, anybody ever see this movie? This is like an iconic movie of the 1980s, Back to the Future. A few weeks ago, we thought it would be fun to show it to our friend's 8-year-old daughter, Hazel. And like Hazel, this is the 1980s. This is the world where we grew up. And Hazel was completely unimpressed. As it turns out, the landscape of 1984 America is pretty much the landscape of today. In fact, somebody took photographs of all the same settings, and the neighborhood where this was filmed hasn't changed at all. And that seems even more strikingly apparent when you compare it to where the character in the movie time travels back to 1954. And everything's different. They actually had to create a new studio set to simulate the urban life of 1954. So the landscape dramatically changed from 1954 to 1984. But we also thought, I guess the screenwriters thought in 1984 that trajectory of change would somehow continue. So at the end of the movie, when the mad scientist comes back from the future, 30 years hence, 2014, he's got a flying car that's powered by a fusion reactor and a blender. So I want to know, where's my flying car? Where's my fusion reactor? And that's what I'm studying during my Loeb year, so thank you. In fact, there's a lot of reasons for this sudden change in our environment and then a stagnation. And I think the book that I read most recently that explains this very well is by a friend of mine, Eric Sanderson. He talks about this oil, cars, and suburbs, and how this mix of policy, technology, and design really contributed to the world that we live in and have been inhabiting for some time. So I've experienced this personally. This is my hometown, Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It's what Mark would call it a legacy city, but I still call it the Rust Belt. Basically, it's a town that's been completely transformed in my lifetime from being, well, not necessarily my lifetime, but in the span of a lifetime, mixed-use, dense urban community with trolley cars and so forth, to basically a few institutions, parking lots, surrounded by a tangle of the suburbs and interstates that are on the other side of Pikes Peak and stretch pretty much across the entire country. So how did this happen? This is just my retelling of a story that's probably familiar to you. Cheap oil, coming from all over the world, enforcing this pattern of growth that's really emphasizes the path to prosperity through single-family home ownership and auto dependency, hollowing out of the urban cores, and then these structures of exclusion and inequity being reinforced by that. We're at a moment now where that whole system has become really abhorrent to our common sense of humanity. At the same time, our lifestyle is making us more and more susceptible to chronic disease like obesity, heart disease, diabetes. And we still have cities that are growing very quickly with faceted towers and great investments in public and private space. But the changing environment and the impacts of a warming environment are challenging a lot of our assumptions about land use and resources, and leaving many of the most vulnerable populations in the world living at the fringes and in highly vulnerable areas. And this isn't just true in America. In fact, these patterns are happening all over the world at different rates. And in some cases, they're much more dire in areas of intense urbanization. So I think we saw this deadly toxic mix well up in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And I was working at the Office of Emergency Management in New York City at that time. And we took this as a real warning call. So here's a few of the projects that New York City has done before and after Katrina. I mean, there's obviously thousands, but these are a few that I've been involved in that I'll show very quickly today. So we did a lot of planning before Hurricane Sandy, starting, just knowing that we're susceptible to coastal hurricanes even without climate change. And of course, scientists tell us that we're more susceptible as the water rises, or as the North Atlantic temperature goes up and more erratic weather patterns. But we developed a pretty sophisticated coastal storm plan that handles evacuation and sheltering. This was in 2006, and it's a plan that is always updated. But as a designer, an urban designer, after we completed that plan, it was obvious to me that we didn't really know where people would live after we sheltered them. Like, we didn't have a plan for the long-term recovery of the city. So some might see this as a logistical problem or a government problem, but I posed that it was a design problem. And so we had a design competition, and Mark mentioned it earlier. It's called What If New York City? In order to ask the question, we developed this neighborhood that we call Prospect Shore. It's kind of a mix of 12 different coastal New York City neighborhoods, and we subjected it to a flood, and then we walked through how different characters would be affected, how different neighborhoods, how infrastructure would be affected. And so if the mayor announced the winners, actually at the time, right after this photograph was taken, a reporter asked the mayor, why does design matter in the context of a hurricane? Isn't this just FEMA's problem or a logistic problem or an engineer's problem? And the mayor's response was, I don't know. Why don't you ask that guy? It was his idea. And I wasn't very good at sound bites then, but I basically said that the design had failed. We had seen how the FEMA villages were really not working out so well for people in the South, and then I guess what I might say now is that design always matters. And people should live in places where they feel comfortable and have a dignified existence. So we had great participation in this competition, like 135 entries from all over the world, some really great ideas. But the one that everybody kept coming back to was that we need some sort of modular housing that could be stacked up and readily deployed to a site. And it was a compelling idea, and I actually, at this point, changed from Office of Emergency Management over to the newly formed Urban Design Division at the Department of City Planning under Amanda Burthen and Alex Washburn, and brought with me some of the resiliency planning work. And so we did this drawings by Jeff Shoemaker, who actually Jeff and I will be talking in a few weeks here at the GSD about the Urban Design Group, because Gerald Caden's hosting the first urban design group from the 70s, and we're going to have like a urban design group today conversation. So you'll get to see more great drawings by Jeff. But so Jeff and I and others at DCP, we did this like post-disaster planning playbook where we basically said that if we could do this well and create a sense of community and keep people close to home after the disaster, then we could allow to happen a more democratic and take our time having a planning process and get to the long-term resiliency that the neighborhoods will aspire to after a disaster. This is kind of the model of Kobe earthquake, I've learned. That after Kobe, there was a lot of temporary housing that was deployed outside of town, and then that allowed for some space for people to get together and figure out what they wanted the long-term plan to be. So just jumping ahead in the timeline, we didn't have that ready for Sandy, but after Sandy it became pretty clear that we needed to expand the toolkit. And so we've just built this prototype, OEM, I should say, has built this prototype, but with the participation of all the other agencies in a parking lot in Brooklyn. And so back then, also at city planning, we worked on, well, it became apparent to us that our flood maps were out of date, just like most of the Northeast. And there's a whole process of flood mapping going on, I'm sure you know, and changes to the National Insurance Program. And this is drastically going to affect the way that people use their houses, the way that streets work, the way that people interact with the program inside of buildings. And we knew that there were a lot of questions that were unresolved. Plus, it was all instigated by this very minor code change that we were being prompted to make, which was to change our freeboard, which is a factor of safety above flood elevation, from 1 to 2 feet. which sounds really insignificant, right? But when you start to put it into the larger context, it brought up all these really complex urban design questions about how are we going to have walkable, dense neighborhoods with these high flood elevations. So we put together this, this report. This was like right before Hurricane Sandy. Of course, we couldn't do it alone. I think we needed collaboration from both the design advocates, the architects. We had a charrette. We showed them different building types, and we showed like what the design requirements were. And they came up with great ideas, but I mean, they were largely unbuildable under our code. So I'm running low on time here. Any questions so far? I just want to make sure I'm getting right. Yeah.
On number 27, there was a fleetingly saw a phrase that said covered stoop.
Covered stoop.
Covered.
Right.
Like, what is New York without the stoop?
Exactly. We need that street life, and the stoops are very emblematic of like the kind of street life that we want to have happen in New York City.
Cover the stoop mean?
Well, cover the stoop means create like an intermediation between the public and private space. So I'll make sure I get more to that. And I think that kind of goes to the next slide, which was, we didn't really know that we could build the stuff or that the projects proposed by the charrette would actually be conceivable in the, in the current regulatory environment. So starting from nowhere, we decided it was important to start with urban design principles. So these are the principles we talked about. Preserve neighborhood character. Neighborhoods are going to have to change. Visual connectivity between between the first floor of a building and what's happening inside the building. That's the covered stoop. It's like just having a place where you can stand and participate in street life. It's Jane Jacobs' Eyes on the Street. And then that the architecture should be dynamic. Just because the building's raising up, shouldn't give up on what happens beneath. And then inviting access. So we had all that report ready. We're actually about to release it, and then Hurricane Sandy happened. 43 New Yorkers lost their lives, hundreds of homes destroyed, and thousands more badly damaged. And it left us in the process of recovery that will, in our best estimation, take years. But it's been great to witness the great collaboration, participation of lots of those people we worked with in the previous years get together and really try to figure out the best path toward rebuilding. A lot of missteps, a lot further to go. For me as an urban designer, what's striking is that this recovery is happening in this is a map of the inundation area, and when I look at this map, I think about the incredible density and diversity of the building stock in New York City. And everybody has their own path toward resilience. It's both a personal struggle, but it's a community struggle, and it's certainly a municipal struggle. So after the storm, I talked to a lot of people about what's going on in their neighborhood. We took these big maps out into the neighborhoods and put them up on high school gymnasiums, asked people to put dots on the map telling us whether they wanted to stay in the neighborhood, move somewhere else, or they didn't know. So orange is, missing the slide here. Orange dots mean I want to move away. Oh, and then this guy wanted to just live with us. I did a lot of talking to people about their individual situations, like tell me about your house. Does it have a basement? Does it have a boiler in the basement? What's your particular vulnerabilities? And then I would draw the house with people. This is Cindy's house in Staten Island. Cindy lives in what's a mapped wetland. She's also on a very narrow lot. And the house is obviously like 1920s, it's very old. And she wanted to know how she could elevate it, but she's in a wheelchair. So we talked about like different ways that she could integrate a lift and how it would have to work with building code and zoning. And I've talked to other groups of neighbors who want to do something collectively. And this is a street in Brighton Beach that's 4 feet wide, and all these little bungalows that have been owned by the same families for generations they have water up to their eaves. and there was a fire on the street, and they know they can't rebuild it the way it was before. So they know they have to change. They know they have to adapt to this changing environment, but they don't know how. And so well, one small thing we've done is set up this Sandy Design Help Desk. It's we train these architects to go out into the neighborhoods, train them in all the codes and all the issues. And they go and sit with people and give them personalized one-on-one counseling on rebuilding their house and their path toward resiliency. And so here's just last few seconds here what I plan to do during the year. I think Mark mentioned earlier, I want to capture some of these lessons learned from Sandy, particularly what we did wrong, what we could do better, what other places have done right, and what's the role of the designer. And then I've been having a lot of trouble talking to people about risk, those individuals I mentioned, but everybody has trouble understanding these crazy maps and what they mean and how they affect people's lives. So I want to build a website that can use more advanced tools of visualization, simulation, to actually show people what risk is and what resilience is. And then finally, some few students mentioned to me this design competition, so I'm looking for partners for this. I think this would be really fun. I think Boston has almost all the same issues that New York does. I just saw these maps, it's really striking. 13,000 new properties in the proposed flood zones. Boston will have to adapt to. All those folks who are in the flood zones, one way or the other, are going to be met with the need to change, and we designers have to help figure out how it happens. So thank you very much.
By your speech that I forgot that I'm going on there. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, this is actually one of the cities that might very possibly be underwater if climate change really is going to be what we expect it to be. This is Venice, and yeah, this is me and some of the things that I do, and. Yeah, firstly, I just want to say that I'm really grateful to be here. I'm the first one in my country to be granted the Loeb Fellowship, and it's been great. And yeah, and it really was great to hear your talks as well, especially when Scott pointed out in his slides that the green areas can be a lifesaver as well. So I think that's very important to remember. So, how many of you know this Latin proverb, navigare necesse est? Just raise your hand. Nobody? Well, I know Sally does. Okay, yeah, so it means it's necessary to sail. To sail is necessary. And life is not so necessary. And, well, to skip the historic origin, or just to say that historically it actually meant to say that it's more important to get things done than to actually survive. But that's not what I'm seeking here. I want to read in this proverb that it's important to navigate, meaning that it's important to read the landscape, the stars, the moon, what they did in the old days to be able to navigate actually. So to find the direction. And I hope that this year, for me, would be one of the lighthouses on my way to seek that direction. It's commonly interpreted of meaning that it's more important to be on the move than actually find your goal. But I actually think that they are both important. So this is me doing what I like doing the best. Experiencing landscape in person. So what I try to do with my art is to capture the essence of fleeting moments. And my paintings are sort of a window to the world through my own personality. and there are these ephemeral glimpses to reality. And I always do them on the spot outside in the landscape, actually so close to nature that one time I was in Galapagos Islands and a sea lion almost licked my toe. That was a little scary, actually. It was a really big sea lion, like 100 kilograms. So anyway, it's very important to be in the nature, to be close to nature, to experience nature. And that's actually where I'm coming from in terms of landscape. And I think that these travel journals that I make they are interpretation of place. And that I think is in common with landscape architecture and city planning that I'm also doing. They are about reading the landscape, experiencing the landscape, and making interpretations on it on a more analytical way, but still, it's very important in both of those disciplines to be sensitive to a place and to understand it, to live it, to feel how it is to be in a place. So, what I'm interested in is a good city based on all this. And I did this Facebook poll a while ago where I asked people what they thought that a good city is like. And this picture right here on the left, okay, it's actually something that a 70-year-old boy took from the internet to show what he thinks is a good city. Well, I don't know if that's what we want to aim at, but I think the striking thing about that poll was that most of the answers actually included water or the natural environment in some way. So I think it's clear that nature, the green and the blue, are important for elements for a good city. So what I've been doing the last 12 years is I've been working for the city of Helsinki. First as a landscape architect for the inner city area, and then the last 6 years as the head of environmental office. And then the way I got there, I worked first as a consultant doing landscape designs, and then as head of S4 technical office implementation of parks. So I chose to go to city planning because I wanted to find somewhere that I could look into things in a larger scale, have a more holistic view, instead of that sort of limited view of a consultant or implementation designer. So I think Helsinki is a good city. It is green and it's blue, but it can always be better. And I think that it's also important to cherish the things that are good in the city and to make changes so that they would make things better instead of worse. Helsinki is the city in Finland with the most dense population in the country. It has 100 miles of shoreline and 300 islands, so it's very maritime. The city center is compact, but the city is also very green. There's 40% of green area of the city's area. And the urban structure in the city core is extending radially from the seashore to the forests, and so is the green area structure. And Helsinki is facing its biggest land use change in 100 years. This is just the implementation that is going on from the current master plan that is being realized now. Now that the commercial harbor has been relocated, so there's a lot of vacant space in the city, or very close to the city, that will be taken into housing and also construct some new green areas. So this is the vision for Helsinki, what it would look like in the future. But right now we are also making the new master plan, and that is a very important step towards defining what kind of Helsinki we will have in the future. This is a map very much in progress, so I didn't want to show it very big because I would be told off by the city planning department doing so. It's an unfinished design at this point. But there is a very strong tendency to densify the city and to make new connections, traffic lines that traverse the city also east-west. And what that would do to the green areas is my concern. So these are the challenges that we are facing. How to preserve the things that have value in the green area system, in the cultural heritage, in the seascape. For instance, this area here that I made myself a detailed plan for, it has already been sort of fragmented. And then this other area here, this is the central park that is our most historic green finger, that it will also be diminished to the half of what it is right now if all the visions of the new master plan will be realized. It's based on the population increase of 39% in the whole city. So how to save this backbone of the green area system, the green fingers, that I think is the essence, along with the seascape of the city. The challenges are about values in nature, in cultural heritage, and in creating new landscape based on these. That would also have a foothold in the locality, in the particularities of the sea landscape, for instance. And of course, last but not least, the sustainability challenge. How can we, with green areas, respond to climate change? What are the things that we can do there? And to address these issues, I initiated this green area strategy that is sort of a vista to the future. The abbreviation of our little pamphlet is, or not little, it's 150 pages in Finnish language. I actually have it there, but I thought it would be a little too much. This is abbreviation actually of the Finnish name, which is Vihreiden virkistysalueiden strateginen kehityskuva, so you can imagine why it should abbreviate. But what it actually means is strategic guidelines and vision for green areas and green and recreational areas, also meaning the seascape and all that. And so the first part was approved by the City Planning Committee last year, and now we are making the second part, which is an interpretation on like tangible form, like on maps, on what we are doing. How am I doing with the time? Okay. Yeah, so we were, like Mark mentioned, we were looking at these issues from 3 different perspectives. And then we are aiming to end up this green network that will eventually be a part of the master plan and define the green areas that will be left. Because it's clear that some of the green areas will be built, and that is okay, but we just need to be there. The landscape architects need to be there in order to define what are the most valuable parts that should be sustained, and in what way, to create this green network that has integrity and is interconnected. So these are the theses that we ended up in the plan, which I probably are quite obvious for planners, but one of the questions that I wanted to address, that I still want to address, is that what is the appropriate balance of green and built up areas in a city, depending on a city, of course, and how much is too much? Is there such a thing as a density limit for good life? And how can we come to that conclusion? Of course, it's not just about the amount of green areas. Although we all know what are the good effects of green areas on people's health, there's a lot of research showing that the closer you are to a green space, the more you use it, and the healthier lifestyle you will have. And it's especially important for the people with less assets, old people, young people, children, poor people who don't have the money to hop on their cars and drive somewhere far away. So I think it's also a question of social justice. So to address that, we started making this diagram showing what kind of green areas should we have in what kind of distances in different traffic forms, from walking to public transit, of course, no cars included here. So we also need to know what the future generations want from our from their public spaces, open spaces, green areas, is not necessarily what we want. Whatever that is, I still think that there are some timeless things about landscape, about the beauty of landscape. And at this point, I want to ask you, which one of you thinks that this is a beautiful landscape? So, who thinks that this is a beautiful landscape? Come on! No, this is interesting. Not everybody raised their hands. I hope you're not sleeping, or maybe this is not the idea of beauty for you. But the point is to say that beauty is not only in the eye of the beholder, but there are some things that are sort of eternal that we all consider beautiful and experientially rich and desirable. So one of our theses is that recreation should be accessible to everyone. So this is, and then another approach is the identity approach. Who could imagine St. Peter's, the Vatican without St. Peter's Square, Washington DC without the mall, New York City without Central Park, or Helsinki without the Senate Square and the Esplanade green axis, historic green axis. So it's very important for the city identity to have open spaces that attach people to their past. So to define the character of the city, what is important about it. And I think that in Helsinki, one of the things that is, for me, is the most important is that you have for instance, the natural shoreline accessible to everybody. It's very close to the urban city center, so it's walking. This is right next to the city center. Like walking distance, in the walking distance you have places where you can go swimming, where you can enjoy yourself, you can just walk to the nature, enjoy nature. And it's also about what kind of a landscape the city is constructed into. This is something that you shouldn't forget when you think about the appropriate density for each city. And the history that it will be present in the, also in the experience of the city dweller. The cultural heritage, that is also an identity factor for people living in a certain neighborhood. The functional diversity, one of the important things you have to cherish, what you can do there in the summer. And for instance, the urban forests are something that are sometimes considered just sort of leftover land, but that's not true. They are very multifunctional. You can do a lot of things in an urban forest, a lot more things that you would imagine. And in the winter, in a country like Finland and a city like Helsinki, of course, it's important to consider what kind of a landscape you have in the winter, what you can do there. And for instance, for me, one of the best things is that I live right there, so I can just take the tram with my skis and go to the Central Park here and go skiing. So I think that those kind of things we have to cherish. You can, even the Santa Claus is skating next to the railway station. So I think that the essence of Helsinki is its green fingers and the blue palm, in a way. Also the islands and the accessibility of them, the older military islands. We only have one sort of big recreational island as a UNESCO heritage site, the Suomenlinna Island Fortress, that is part of the transit system, but they all should be. So finally, the sustainable city. Even the scientists disagree what the effect of climate change really is and what we really can do and cannot do. So, but in any case, we need to adapt to climate change. We need to find ways to make our cities flexible and resilient, be it not building too close to a river corridor or cherishing natural shoreline, stormwater management, urban farming, greening the grey infrastructure, or sustainable accessibility of the green areas. All those things must be cherished. And it all comes back to the people, how the people feel being in the city. So this is the approach that we shouldn't forget. and to leave them the room to do the things that they want to do in the city. We have this restaurant day, these flea markets, these are all sort of citizen initiative projects. So what I want to do while I'm here is to look at some great cities. Of course, Boston is one of them. And to see how that links to the experience, how the green area structure links to the experience. I've already made some observations about Boston. For instance, the Rose Kennedy Greenway, I think it links beautifully the old city to the waterfront. And the ICA is one of the places that brings people in close contact with the water and with each other. But there are issues, like I think accessibility and contact with water in the riverside and in other places, and also the accessibility of the beautiful archipelago that there is in Boston. It could be better, it could be in all seasons. I found out that the boat stops running in the 1st of September, which is sort of crazy because you could be going there all year round and all the services could be improved. So those kind of things. And I think that we need to go on asking the difficult questions about good city. And I actually want you to, like if you have the time or you find the interest to email me with answers to some of these questions. I would like to know what are your all-time 3 favorite cities in the world and why. Just put them down in 3 words. And what would it be that would make your own city more livable? What are the kind of things that you think you don't have there? And meaning the city where you live in now and where your daily life is. So I would be really interested in knowing, and I hope some of you have the time to actually help me with this. So, I guess I'll end with this one. Because what I want to do also is to sort of come back to earth, down to earth, from that detached view of a planner that I've been sort of entangled in for the past years, and to feel the landscape, like these people are doing in the beginning of the 1900s in Helsinki. We should. Yeah, those are probably some of the first Loeb. Very stylish gentleman, I think. I think it's important to take time to smell flowers, to feel the salty sea breeze on your face, and maybe even to sit down and make some sketches and watercolors. I think that's what I would like to do, so I'll actually end with this one. Kiitos. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we have time for some question and answers, and I would actually like to ask all 3 presenters to come. We have some chairs arranged for you in the front. I would actually, could we also turn on the lights, maybe, so we can see one another better? Ooh. Oh, you have a second microphone? Okay. I think obviously we saw a great diversity of arenas of action. You see that all 3 of the fellows presenting today are not just observing cities, but they're actively involved, or I shouldn't say just cities, so landscapes, cities, regions, and they all have different ways of implementing change or helping others, collaborating with others to implement change. I think we deliberately sort of started with Scott at this sort of like this very broad regional scale and looking at a landscape scale between 2 different kinds of landscapes, very different kinds of landscapes and the issues that those bring. And we went then to Thaddeus with, I would say at least for the GSD community, the more familiar arena of operating on a metropolitan scale and thinking about the problems of cities. And then we sort of deliberately left Maria for last to try to integrate these 2 because of the importance of Helsinki's natural green network and of course the beauty of the waterscapes there. And thinking that maybe between these we would have a kind of a chemical reaction somehow, a kind of an interaction between these kinds of contrasting arenas. So, and I think that maybe in addition to the kinds of arenas that they're operating in, or the kind of the contexts, I think they're also operating in different capacities, as planners, as designers, but also as people who care about conservation. I want to open this up. I actually am not going to start with my own question, but I want to leave sort of that as a group sort of characterization, maybe to try to ask the audience now for some questions. And we have a traveling mic here. Yes. Joyce Rosenthal.
Yeah, so what a wonderful set of talks. And if you put them all together, you might ask, well, what's the role of the urban planner and designer in helping the public appreciate the value of ecosystem services and blue-green infrastructure? So maybe, you know, Thaddeus's work on risk and Maria's work in the city, you know, do you see a role for designers in communicating that value in John's work in public lands? And there's a second question here. We could team up.
Sure.
Judge Sheckman was invited by Joyce here today to lecture in her class from Rutgers University and NYU. And my question would be, I guess, a bit more controversial. So there is a somewhat, of course, of a conflict between providing open space and natural landscapes in cities, which is a lot of the conservation work and a lot of the work I'm familiar with in the exurbs might be seen as increasing sprawl by lowering average density, especially like what land conservation is on the urban fringe. And it's true in the coast too, of course. You have places that are very dense, and certain kinds of open spaces might actually reduce that density. And always having this conflict questions with my colleagues about the role of open space and how would you, what is the optimal, it's an optimal density question, but for the land conservationists, how do you also see the flip side, which is encouraging density as an important role, and how do you balance that? Thanks.
Maria, could you hand the mic to Scott?
Sure, and we've seen, I guess, both success and failure in the quandary that you present, where we've had development leapfrog open spaces and really not have our grand design come to fruition in terms of density encouragement. But I guess, you know, one thing that I would point out is that there are certain types of development that we're facing in Colorado, in particular this trend we have, 35-acre development, that are just, they're not fiscally feasible in a lot of counties where we have 35-acre development taking place, and that means a rural residence on what was once agricultural land that's been parceled out into a 35-acre lot, which is something that you can do in our state unless local zoning says no, and in many places that's not the case. You know, what we see there is that these types of developments are costing the communities $1.60 plus in service and infrastructure costs for every dollar that they bring in taxes. So I don't know if that's a way to address your question. I don't know if there's one answer to your question, but that to me is sort of a stark example of the way that we're growing around cities, and this is county government, not city government, but it's not working. So I guess the next question is containment working? And is containment even what we're trying to do? I don't know that I look at my work in terms of a containment strategy, but I do look at it more as, part of this is coming from the Office of Economic Development, as an economic strategy. So it's not just land, but it's the economies those lands are supporting, and are the lands themselves producing some kind of I guess, return that's beneficial to the community, and not all developments are doing that.
Can I just one piece of that follow-up would be on the, so often having, often buying land in conservation easements is seen as a positive by communities when their goal is to actually kind of keep the land values up and exclude certain people. You know, that's true, of course, in the coast as well. You know, land is valuable. If you by, it reduces densities, it encourages, it reduces population density and prompts overcrowding in schools and such. It keeps communities wealthy. And so how do you also balance the need for providing access to low-income populations?
Okay, that's a great question, and I guess Boulder, Colorado would be a good example of what you've just described, where we have all this open space and we have a very affluent community in the center of it. I'll give you another example, an effort that was led by a former Loeb fellow, Rob Bleiberg, in the town of Palisades, which is a very small fruit-growing community on the western slope. They were faced by a lot of oil shale development pressures, and we're seeing a lot of land conversion on the historic orchard grounds. This is an area that, in less than 3,000 acres of orchards, provides more than 50% of the peaches in the state of Colorado, which is a big peach-growing state. Protecting a few properties does not guarantee the sustainability of that community, of those industries, of providing affordable land or affordable housing when you have these skyrocketing costs that are driven by essentially the oil and gas values. But in that community, there was enough of a critical mass of land protected that what happened was people started to change their thinking, whereas before it was, there's not a future here for me or my kids. I'm not going to make that investment, in $200,000 investment in packing shed equipment. I'm not going to buy that additional piece of property. I'm going to sell. Today, with more than half the orchard lands protected and keeping the cost of agricultural land down for new producers that are coming in, a lot of these protection efforts have not only created that critical mass that enables people to think that, well, our agricultural future is possible here, but it's given them access into it. There's a lot of new young farmers, something we're not seeing where I'm working in the lower Arkansas Valley, entering into the game there. So I think those are two juxtaposed trends. There's probably a million others along that spectrum that exist. These are the things we sort of battle with as we look at perpetual land use.
Yeah, I just wanted to address that question about the balance of green and built-up areas, and the sort of opposite of a dense city, which would be the suburban sprawl, which of course is not desirable, because I think it's clear that a dense urban structure is much more sustainable than a suburban sprawl, but that is precisely why we need to address these issues to find the right way of making the new city, to make the districts more dense, and then at the same time think about that the green areas connect to each other. They don't necessarily have to be very big, but they have to be connected to each other. And actually, I've noticed this when I've lived in Cambridge for the 3 weeks now, that there are no places where you can go running on gravel. I'm used to, like, not walkable distance. Like you would have to jump into your car and then drive to Fresh Pond, or take your bike to the Fresh Pond and then jog around there. Like little things like that you should really have access to sort of easy exercise close to the home. And even if you have a lot of green, you don't necessarily have that kind of services. Like the dense city provides the services that people need, but I think a good city also provides the ecosystem services that we need. So the balance between those is what we are seeking for.
Should we, are there more questions? Rena, you had a question. Could we pass the mic, please? Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Rena Fonseca. I direct executive education at the school. And one of the things that threads through your talks is water. It's very striking, from conserving water to landscaping and living with water, reacting to and living around water. And as we work around the world in cities that vary from Jeddah to Nassau to Mexico City after the Acapulco floods to Toronto and Boston, it's very striking how the issues you have covered are at the center of the planners' worries, and water in particular. So the question is really to you, Thaddeus, but it's also a question to Mark, because this may be something that the Loeb program wants to build on. You're a web tool that you're planning to build to teach communities how to be more resilient in specific ways. Are you going to have open-sourced pieces of that so that people like your colleagues can add their expertise and communities around the world can add what they know and come to it for advice?
I'm like here on this learning curve that's like, so I have no idea, but hopefully, yes. I have a lot to learn on this subject, but that would be wonderful. And I mentioned Eric Sanderson earlier, and he's just built a great open source tool to measure the ecological performance of land use and actually it's a map of Manhattan that you can alter the ecosystems and it will like read out the ecological performance in terms of carbon, water, biodiversity. It's a really great thing. So I got to see a little bit of how that kind of open source technology and computing can work from him. But I think it's needed, right? But I think there's also, it's a very local thing too, right? I mean, you have the way that you talk to one group of people is really has to be different. I mean, even just dealing with neighbors it's really a different conversation. And so it's hard to make a web tool that has empathy built in. That's what you really need in order to like operate in these, conditions. So I don't think it can be divorced from the human experience. There's no technology that can really help people, get through it. Maybe it can teach a few things, but it's got to be one-on-one.
My name is Barbara Connect, and I look forward to meeting all of you again. My question actually is for you, Thaddeus, as a sometime New Yorker. You made a couple of mentions, first of all, for the long history before Sandy of the work you've been doing, and also you mentioned in the charrette that none of the designs could be built. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the regulatory and code challenges of this work, because we are all facing this and we're looking at it saying, it's ready, let's go. But I suspect there's a lot of interests that are a little bit, there's some pushback coming from various arenas, and they may be more than just code and regulatory. I'd be interested to hear about that.
On the code issues and the regulatory issues, because of that work we did, we were able to change a lot of stuff. So we passed a whole, to allow basically people to build to the higher flood elevations. But that, of course, is an ongoing process. I think probably more, the barrier that most people have to either, elevating their house or finding some other form of resilience is cost. I mean, first of all, it's a lack of understanding of what resources are available to them, but it's really, it's cost, but they're stuck in a really difficult place, as you know, because the flood insurance changes are going to impose an entirely new cost on them. So they're going to either have to spend a lot of money over time or a lot of money up front. And what will happen, I mean, what I'm worried about in these neighborhoods is that in the areas where there's infrastructure and there's like a long-standing community investment, those neighborhoods will become expensive to live in and they'll gentrify, and a lot of the middle class and working class people will be driven out. And then in the areas where there isn't that investment, where the underlying infrastructure is not quite there, they'll go into a cycle of disinvestment and decline and hollow out. And then hopefully someone will be able to consolidate them into new productive ecosystems, right? And I think that's our expectation in terms of Staten Island, but that's like 30 years of pain and anguish, And so we need better tools for this managed retreat. I mean, watching it happen right now, it's not managed. It's a kind of a, so the governor of New York has this buyout program that you can sell your house if you're substantially damaged in certain areas. And I think it's an important tool, but it wasn't combined with a comprehensive plan for that area, which is going to leave a lot of people living basically in a swamp in 10 years. And did that answer your question?
I think we have time for one more question right here.
So my name is this time? I guess so. My name is Wick Samore. I'm from Somerville, walked over. I'm involved in a citizens advisory committee looking at a lot of expected new development in Union Square, a mile from here, new transit station basically. And we have about 1/12 the open space per person of the Helsinki recommendation, by the way. You got by the way. My question is, when you get to the equity issues, how do you do two things? One, kind of work with people in broad equity communities where equity is an issue on showing them examples and maybe how to implement some local green-blue infrastructure. And then secondly, how do you balance the equity arguments when there are things like affordable housing, need for jobs, with also the kind of whole slate of blue-green, sustainable resilience issues that all of you have addressed one way or another? Anyone?
Well, first of all, I want to say that the 40% is not a recommendation. It's that the situation at the moment that we have green area. So it will, at the end, it will probably come down to something like 25%, which then might be considered a recommendation. But as I said, the work is ongoing, so we don't really have recommendations yet. So we are just in the process of trying to define what the right sort of amount is. But it is complex, but it's not about just the amount of green area, like I said. So there are so many other issues, and also the landscape we have to take into account. What would be right for Helsinki is probably not right for Cambridge or Oslo or Rio de Janeiro, because there are so many different. They are in a different setting. They provide different sort of boundaries for growth as well. But as to your question, I think that has to do with the urban density, that we have to find this sort of counterbalance, that there is enough density to provide all these things, affordable housing, enough services, enough people, enough critical mass to have the services in the different places. So that is precisely why we do the design. I don't have an answer for your question, but that's what we're working on.
I think it's what came clear to me from the three presentations is that all of you have been speaking from the point of view of long-range planning and thinking about big numbers and big scopes of projects. And I think what came across to me, and I'm kind of pumping them up a little bit here, but what really came across to me was that each of you has considered somehow the human dimension as something that needs to be argued for in the planning process. That is, you talked about on the web toolkit will never replace an in-person consultation. Maria, you've always talked about what makes density in the city worth living there. Finding the balance between amenity and provision, for the masses and for the masses of people who are coming to live in cities. And Scott, again, your images of landscape have been so inspiring to remind people of why Colorado is increasing its population at such a higher rate than other places. But then again, finding the urgency of balancing that growth with, again, the things that are lost when growth is not managed well. So I think it turned out to be a really remarkable sort of honing in on certain themes between three different areas of operation. But I don't know if you all felt the same way. I felt it really kind of came together through this overlay of human respect for the human desirable living place together with obviously the imperatives of future planning. All right, I went on rambling a lot with that one. I'm going to just end the session here. Thank you all for coming. There will be another session on Thursday. So let's give a big hand.